Thanks for listening to the Gray Ave Podcast, a show for driven young people with big goals. We meet inspiring people from around the world and learn from them, from entrepreneurship, health, travel, lifestyle, and more. We are also on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher Radio. Rate and write us a review. You can also download each episode on www.grayjabesi.com. Enjoy the show.
Hey, what's up? My name is Gray, and I welcome you to another episode of the Gray Ave Podcast, a show where I go around and find the most interesting, the smartest, the most successful, and the most interesting people from around the world and learn from them, because I believe there's no better way than learning from the best. And today is no exception. Our guest is Chris Nichols from Chaos Group. Chris is the director of Chaos Group, but he is famously known for lighting in the visual effects industry. He's highly linked to V-Ray. V-Ray is a product that is produced by Chaos Group, which is the company that he's currently working for as a director. So for those of you who are not familiar with all this, I'm just gonna have to give a little bit of an explanation. So Chaos Group is a technology company. They help artists and designers to create photoreal imagery and animation for design, television, and feature films. They actually recently won a 2017 Academy Award, which is more like an Oscar for visual effects. So that's about it about Chaos Group. You can check it out. I'll leave the links in the description. But Chris is well known for lighting in the visual effects scene, and he has worked on a lot of films such as The Girl with the Dragon Tatoo, Maleficent, Oblivion, Tron Legacy, Stealth, iRobot, The Day After Tomorrow. I can go on and on, but I think I will leave the link as well. You can check him out. He's a very interesting guy. He has his own podcast as well called CG Garage, which I'll get to it just in a moment. So you might be wondering how I met Chris or why I had to bring him on the podcast. I'm going to give a little backstory to this. For those of you who might not know, I work in computer graphics, and some of you might think of graphic design by hearing that word, which happens to a lot of people. But I work in 3D and animation in the film industry, usually doing visual effects and animation. I hope that makes a lot of sense to some of you guys. So I taught myself how to do all that, and as I was coming up, I looked up a few people that are really, really good in that domain. That's how I usually learn most things when I'm trying to learn on my own. So Chris was one of the people that I found that were really, really good in what they do. So I looked him up. I did some research on it. Then I found some of his tutorials. Then I watched them. I learned a lot of stuff from him, and I also listened to a podcast about him. Then he shared his story and how he got started and all that. So what stood out to me about Chris was that the way he started and where he is today is really, really very different. He has changed in so many ways, kind of like transforming into many different career paths, but kind of interrelated. So that's one thing that I wanted. That's one thing that I wanted to do for myself, like not just to be pigeonholed in just one career path. Just say, oh, maybe because I studied marketing, or because I am a lawyer, or because I'm this and that, then you just have to do that one thing all the time. Chris actually is the guy who kind of opened my eye in terms of, okay, so you can take what you know from this aspect or industry and integrate it with something else and kind of start a new career or get yourself into a new career path. So Chris has been more like a mentor to me indirectly, even though I've never spoke to him or known him directly, but he has been more like a mentor. I've always looked up to him. And at one point, then he started a podcast, and I started listening to the podcast since the beginning. And the podcast actually it's called CG Garage. You guys should check it out. He has great guests there, like Tim Miller, the director of Deadpool. He has 2 podcasts with him, one before the movie and one after the movie. And there's another podcast I would recommend to check it out. It was with Norman Seif. He's the photographer of one of the most popular photographs of Steve Jobs. And there's one with Mickey Willis. I recommend you guys check it out as well. It was really great. There's so many. So you might think, well, because he's a computer graphics guy or a technology guy, maybe his podcast would just be about tech. But no, actually, it is more about CG because that's what he does. But anybody can listen to it and just learn from the conversations that he has with these great people. So it's something that I recommend that you guys check it out. It's definitely one. I have probably mentioned it before that it's one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to. So I apologize for the very long intro. I just hope that it gives you a little bit of clarity of what you're getting into. And also, for some of you who know me personally, you might know that I like to use the phrase, sometimes I have it on my computer, or I just like to say, everything has Fresnel. And you don't actually understand what it's all about. Actually, I copied it from Chris. He started that line. And I asked him in the podcast about it. So just to give you a little bit of hints, but that's it. So I hope you enjoy it. It gets better as we go. We start with history. So it just went on for like 20 minutes talking and giving his story. I didn't even try to distract him. And then from there we took it conversational, and then I started asking questions and all that. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I will put everything that will be mentioned in the links, in the show notes. So make sure you check those out, and don't forget to leave me a review on iTunes, as well as subscribing to the podcast.
Hello.
Hi Chris, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Oh, good. It's so surreal that I'm used to hearing your voice on CG Garage.
It's kind of it's interesting. So I'm curious. How did you hear about CG Garage?
I work in visual effects as well, so
Gotcha.
It just makes sense that I'm familiar with CG Garage.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Good.
So you're in LA right now?
I am. Yeah, I'm in Culver City.
Okay. No coyotes today?
No coyotes today. Those are on my hillside. I usually have some coyotes, and we actually have a mountain lion that's in our hillside that's been tagged and known as P41. We know him well. So keep your dogs inside at night.
Right.
But I'm sure you have your fair share of wildlife over in South Africa, right?
Oh yeah, it's incredible. But I live right in the city, so it's like for me to see wildlife, I have to drive a little bit out of town, like maybe 25 kilometers. Then I can see some penguins and stuff.
Oh right. Oh, the penguins. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think you're going to make my job easier today because you know how all this thing works, and you're using a microphone. I can hear you sound very well.
Okay, good. Yeah, I try to make sure the audio sounds good.
Right. So most of my audience, obviously, they come from different domains of industries. So not all of them might do the visual effects, and actually not all of them know that I work in the visual effects myself. Yeah, but I work in the visual effects.
What is the nature of your audience?
It's just, I would explain it like this, just people that are very curious about things and they want to learn almost from everyone that they can find inspiring and try to improve themselves, whether in their careers or aspiring entrepreneurs, people who want to start businesses and stuff like that. And travelers as well. There's a lot of travel community.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Absolutely. But you're probably the nerdiest guest I've ever had on the
Oh,
podcast.
okay.
Yeah, and that's good.
Okay.
Yeah. So, if you had to explain yourself to somebody who isn't in the visual effects, as some of my audience here, how would you explain yourself?
Oh, that's tough because I've done so many different things. I've well, I guess I would call myself a creative person that uses technology to create things. I guess that would be a description that I would use. My background is kind of a little bit all over the place, which is not uncommon for people in visual effects. A lot of people in visual effects have very diverse backgrounds, and that's usually their strength. But I had my early education was in my undergraduate degree was in mathematics, but I also majored in fine art at the same time. And then I took that to architecture school, and I learned architecture. I got a master's in architecture from Rice University, and I was in Texas. And I practiced architecture for a while. While I was in school, I got fascinated by this new thing that was going on, which was computer visualization. So I was lucky enough that they had this lab that they had just started. It was called the Rice Advanced Visualization Lab, or RAVEL, as we called it. And they'd gotten a grant, and they'd gotten a lot of money to build out so the top of the line computers at the time. This is around 93. Top of the line computers to do visualization, and they wanted to see what would happen when they gave these to architecture people and see what they would do. They had a bunch of back then there were 486 computers, and some Macintoshes, and they also had a whole bunch of SGIs, which were very complicated machines, and had complicated software on them, like something called Wavefront and another program called Alias. This is before it became Alias Wavefront when they merged. And so I learned how to do that stuff out of just being curious about it. And I also found that a lot of architects were not necessarily very interested in that because it was too complicated. Back then, a lot of people were still drawing things by hand and drafting by hand. So I learned how to do things like AutoCAD and then 3D Studio and Wavefront, and started looking at doing animations and things like that. And I sort of saw the power of computer visualization in architecture. And I knew that I was basically using the same tools that everyone was using or not everyone, but they were starting to use in movies. So, Jurassic Park had come out just around that time. And so the only place I was going to learn how to use these tools was looking at the movie industry. So that sort of became a place that I had to look to and understand. But I continued to actually be in architecture after that. And I sort of, because I became good at it at the school. When I graduated, they hired me as a teacher at the school to help teach people how to use it. And I did that for a number of years. But I had to I was only teaching 1 or 2 classes a semester, and I kind of had to have a day job because it wasn't enough to pay my bills to just teach 1 or 2 classes a semester. So I got a day job as an architect and worked in architecture at a place called Gensler, which is one of the largest architecture. Well, right now it is the largest architecture firm in the world. And they hired me because of my computer background. They hired me to do visualization for them. So I learned how to do that, and sort of we started in this group over there. There were several of us at Gensler that got together and communicated, and I was very, very passionate about it. And I ended up, my wife ended up being interested. She also went through a career change, similar one. She was a software system tester. She was testing software. And do you remember back in the day when there was the whole Y2K scare? Okay, so back in the year 2000, there was a scare that all the computers in the world would crash because the years that all the old computer programs had, especially the banking software, only had 2 years for the date. And they were scared that when it would roll back to 00, all their numbers would mess up. So they had to go to all they had to go to all the old programs that were done back in the 80s and 70s and stuff and retrofit them so they would understand that the 00 was actually the next year and not 100 years in the past. So she was doing that, which was honestly was just a horrible, horrible job, and she hated it because it was just very tedious and stressful. But she also had a background in art, and so I convinced her to take her skills as a computer person and apply them in art. And so I got her through some connections. We got her a job working at the planetarium in Houston, and so she started doing visualization at the planetarium. And we decided that maybe we would move out to LA because she wanted to do more with her graphics background, and Houston was only limited as to how much you could do. So we moved out to LA, and I ended up continuing working at Gensler. I transferred to their office, which was in Santa Monica back then. And then as I ended up here, I ended up meeting more people in visual effects. And one of them contacted me and said, hey, we need some people to work on a big movie. And being an architecture background is perfect because we need to build pretty much all of New York City for this movie we're doing called The Day After Tomorrow. So I said, oh, okay. And so I looked into it, and I was very, I was pretty excited because it was Digital Domain, and they're a very well renowned firm, and I could basically apply my architecture background more directly towards filmmaking. So I ended up getting involved there, and I started in the modeling department and building and doing buildings and buildings and buildings and buildings, and they were very impressed because I could do buildings very quickly because I knew how to do a building. That's what I've been doing as an architect for a while. So I ended up doing that. And then I just became I was very, very curious about lighting at the time. I became very obsessed about lighting, especially in the architecture side of things. What was interesting to me is that, especially in the lighting, at that time, so we're looking at about early 2000s, around 2002 or so, architecture was actually way more advanced, ironically speaking, compared to visual effects in terms of lighting. And it was specifically with an area called global illumination. And since your audience does not necessarily know what that means, and you did give everyone a warning that I'm very nerdy, but global illumination is basically a way of lighting that is much more about the simulation of light. In old methods of computer graphics, when you wanted to light something, and if you look at a surface and the light bounces off that surface, so if you have a white wall and you have a light next to that white wall, the light from the wall or the wall itself will become a light source and fill in the other side. And in the old way of doing computer graphics, you would have to actually fake that and put a light that represents the wall of that light to do the fill light. Global illumination actually takes into account all of the space that you have and creates a very naturalistic light because it actually bounces the light off of every surface correctly. And so I got very much into that. And of course, you can imagine in architecture, that's very important. You need to know how light's going to affect all areas of the space. So that's why architecture embraced it. But the film industry did not, because it was kind of what we call an expensive render. And by expensive, meaning it took a long time to do. And so time is money. So obviously, that's why it's very expensive to do that. So I got very enamored by lighting. And so they decided to put me into a leadership position on my second movie, which was kind of an honor. I got into a movie called iRobot, and they put me in a lead position for lighting in there. There were several leads, and I was one of them, which was kind of a cool thing. So I learned a lot about the process of lighting on films and working with set designers and how sets are done and how you light a set and obviously a lot of character lighting, which was very new for me too. Obviously, I was always working in environments as an architect, but now all of a sudden I had to light a computer-generated robot, and that became sort of a new skill that I picked up, and I worked with my team, and it was a lot of fun. So I worked on several feature films for a while after that, and I bounced around. I went to a place after Digital Domain. I went to Sony ImageWorks, which is sort of the visual effects company that's associated with Sony Pictures, and they're actually located about half a mile from, or maybe a mile from where I am right now. They're in Culver City. And back then it was huge. There was over 1,000 people at ImageWorks. It was enormous. And I was working on the movie Ghost Rider. I don't know if you guys ever saw Ghost Rider. It wasn't not necessarily. Honestly, I haven't seen it myself. I'll tell you that. It's the first movie I worked on that I haven't seen. Wasn't necessarily very interested in it, but one of the great things that happened to me on that movie was running the visual effects supervisor for that. His name is Kevin Mack, who's a good friend of mine now. And he's actually been on my podcast a couple of times. And he is a really nice guy. And one of the big career changes that happened for me was I loved the way that Kevin sort of talked to artists and got the amazing work out of them by being respectful and being good and communicating his ideas very clearly. And I was just really enamored by that. And I sort of looked at that saying, you know what, that's what I want to aspire to be, someone like Kevin. And I think I'd like to be able to talk to people that way and be able to direct things and work that way. But Sony, as I said, was a huge, huge facility. And being able to climb the ranks there is much more of a process where you have to sort of go from this step to the next step to the next step. So I wanted to know what it would take to be a supervisor. So I asked Kevin if he would go out to lunch with me, and I wanted to ask him. I invited him out to lunch, and we went out to a small restaurant here in Culver City. And I remember it very, very clearly because I basically talked to him about it. And I don't know if he necessarily realizes what he said, but he told me was that the best way to sort of learn to be a supervisor is not necessarily to go through the ranks that he could think of, but to work on smaller shows and do smaller work and then do that as a supervisor and then go to bigger shows after that, as opposed to sort of waiting your turn at a big facility. So in a sense, he may not have said this directly, but his words inspired me to quit my job. And I decided that I was going to try to see about going to work at a smaller place. And there was an opportunity that came up at the time. It was a friend of mine who I'd worked with at Digital Domain. His name was Rob Niederhorst, and they were starting a company in LA and based on a company in Detroit that dealt with a lot of automotive stuff, and they were going to start an LA company. And they said, hey, we're starting this thing up. You could be one of the ground people doing this, and do you want to do it? And realizing, coming from a place where I was like, I'm a very successful, or I could be a very successful visual effects artist that would, take my turn. And over the years, I could end up possibly being a visual effects supervisor at a big location if I wait patiently. I decided to say, no, I'm just going to quit that and I'm going to start at the startup. And it may work, it may not work, but I'm going to do it. And so I did that. And actually, it didn't work. The company had some issues. I was struggling a little bit with it, but I learned a lot of the process of how a company works, especially smaller ones, and how work comes in and the process of communicating with clients and stuff like that. So I said, all right, well, at least I learned that. And another smaller company that did visual effects for commercials got in touch with me because they were looking for some artists and looking to expand. And it was a company called Sway Studio. And so I got in touch with them, and they hired me as a CG supervisor, which was also a visual effects supervisor. And for those who don't know, basically, a CG supervisor is someone that, there is kind of a ranking that goes on in visual effects, and it's not always the case, but A visual effects supervisor is the guy who is in charge of all the visual effects, meaning that's the person who is the most directly in contact with the directors and the creative people and communicates whatever is vision that's going across there. CG supervisor usually works under that person and is the one that's making sure that all of the computer graphics is being done correctly, worried about how things are going to get done and coordinating all the logistics of things and worked with the team that way. So Sway was small enough that basically the CG supervisor was also the visual effects supervisor. So I kind of learned both things and did a lot of car commercials, which was actually a lot of fun. Honestly, I loved doing car commercials because there was something about them that are very dynamic. They don't make as many car commercials now, I don't think, that are CG as they did back then. But I honestly have to say that they were really, really solid. There was an amazing tool that they had at Sway. It was a driving simulator that they created where it was basically imagine it was like a computer game where you would drive the cars and it would capture all the motion of the car as you would drive it perfectly. Like it had all the suspension correctly. It would do the tire deformation, the braking, the rocking, and the rolling of the car, everything. So we simulated all the cars, so they look perfect. They always look really great in terms of animation. And I learned a lot of how to direct car motion and lighting and dealing with clients, and ended up being really, really a great experience. And I took that over to a company called Method, which is now a fairly large visual effects company here in Los Angeles. But back when I joined it was still kind of what they call a small boutique shop. And they were interested in taking the knowledge I had from car commercials as well as the knowledge I had from lighting. And I mentioned that earlier about my knowledge about global illumination and ray tracing, which is another way of talking about the lighting of what we do. And I was using a piece of software called V-Ray, which is kind of an important thing, which you'll know soon why. And V-Ray is a very, very sophisticated ray tracer that allows you to do extremely accurate CG lighting. And the best way to describe it to people who don't necessarily know CG, it's the camera portion of CG. It's the one that makes the image that looks real. And it does that by simulating the way light works. So it actually imitates exactly the way a camera works, and it imitates exactly the way lighting works. And so it was kind of a big piece of software, and it was heavily used in the architecture field, which is where I originally came from, and then sort of transitioning into commercials, especially car commercials, because of the way cars look and how shiny they are and all that stuff. And then they wanted to start to transition it into the visual effects world. And so I helped Method sort of develop that and did some great car commercials over there. And then the phone rang again, and it was my old company, Digital Domain, where I was first started. And they were calling me because they decided they were going to do a big movie, and they were going to look at possibly changing the way they were doing things to use V-Ray for rendering. And they were going to do this movie called Tron Legacy. And I said, all right, I'm in, because I love Tron as a movie, the first Tron. And I'd seen one of the tests they had done for Tron Legacy that was put out at Comic-Con. It blew everyone away. So it blew me away. And I said, yeah, I'm totally want to do this. So I started on that team, and I was going to be part of the environments team. But then they started, Eric Barba, who was the visual effects supervisor on the show. He had seen what I'd done in car commercials, and he says, you know what, I can use some of your help on this sequence if you can help out a little bit, which was the light bike sequence on Tron. And I said, okay. So they put me on there, and I said, oh, great, it's another car commercial. The light bike sequence is pretty much a 9-minute car commercial. If you think about it, it's all shiny, pretty cars and glass and stuff like that. But I got really, really into it. And I was on there for almost a year. It's a long time. But I formed a team, and I got all the lighters involved. So I was sort of the lighting lead on the light bike sequence and a couple other ones, but light bike was really the big one. and it was a lot of fun. Just really working on that show, and but boy, did it really tire me out a lot. So they were going to put me on another show after that, but what happens? It's interesting. You know, the way that movies happen is that there's not always a movie waiting for you to start on. So when a new movie comes up, they don't just want you to sit around. They sort of put you back on the box as a lighter and do some work on as a non-supervisor. And so they put me on a movie called Real Steel, which I enjoyed. And so I started looking at it, and I was starting to help out a little bit, and then I started like helping a little bit on the look dev. And so I worked on Adam, the main character, and it was a lot of fun. Real Steel was a really great show. I really enjoyed being on that one, and they were starting to use V-Ray for that one too. So I got excited about doing that, and then I stayed at DD for several years. Worked on called Maleficent. I worked on the American version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I did some work on 47 Ronin and Oblivion. Yeah, one that was a really great one. That was both Oblivion and Tron were the same director, Joe Kosinski, who's a really nice guy. He also is an ex-architect and knows a lot about visual effects and about CG. So really easy to communicate with Joe. I really like him. So I learned a lot about that kind of stuff, and it was kind of cool. And that's basically where my visual effects career ended. And what I mean by ended is that there's a situation that's happening here in Los Angeles and in the film industry in general. Obviously a lot of the studios are based here. You know, in fact, all of them are based here. You know, Disney and Marvel and Columbia and Fox and Sony, all those guys are here. But because of the way that movies are being made, and a lot of places are incentivizing the actual production of movies to be done in other places by giving away huge tax breaks, which pretty much means that if you work in Los Angeles, you're going to be asked to move to places that have tax incentives. And you're either being asked to move, and it's very sad actually, because a lot of people who live in Los Angeles, because this is where the movies are made, but they're constantly, like from movie to movie, if you work on set, you have to move to Vancouver for 9 months, or move to Australia for 9 months, or move to anywhere else that's going to offer tax incentives. And in the movie, in the post-production or visual effects area, that's kind of started falling into the same place. So I was kind of being told that, you know, I either have to move to Vancouver, Canada, or I don't have a job, which, I mean, Vancouver is a great place. It's a beautiful place. I'd love to live there, but I don't know how long my job is going to be there, because the minute any tax incentives are taken away, everyone's going to have to move again. And my wife works in the visual effects industry, but she works in Los Angeles, and she's not going to lose her job anytime soon. And then I have 2 kids that I don't want them to move around, right? I don't want to have to do stuff. They have a home here. So I said, well, I'm going to have to find a way to continue doing things that I do, but stay in Los Angeles. And right at that time, the guys over at Chaos Group, which is the company that makes V-Ray, the software I was telling you guys about, they're actually based in Sofia in Bulgaria, and they were opening up. They became a fairly big company at that point. Back when I first used them in architecture, it was just 2 guys, Vlado and Peter, and now the company had grown to over 100 people they'd opened an LA office, and this guy named Lon Gross, who was a friend of mine, started this office and invited me to come on board. And so I decided, well, that's, you know, not shy to, like I did with when I left Sony, I decided to just say, all right, let's just try that. And I did the same thing. I said, all right, I'm going to quit doing visual effects and see what it's like to work for a software company and what I can do for them. And they hired me as a creative, which was cool. And so I was happy to work on the creative side. And when I was here, we quickly realized one of the things I had one of the skills I had was the fact that I knew a lot of people in the industry. And so we decided to start this new thing called Chaos Group Labs, which is kind of a little bit of a creative R&D area of the company, where when certain people are interested in testing new ideas, trying new technology, or have some ideas, I brainstorm that with them, and I come up with an idea and say, hey, let's do it this way, or do you want to try this, or hey, we have this new technology, it would be perfect for what you're trying to do, or something like that. And so we started creating all these little side projects, and they all came under the Labs umbrella. And then I would do it with them. I would blog about it. Sometimes those features turn into products in our software, and all kinds of things like that. So I just really enjoyed doing that. And then I started realizing that I spend most of my day talking to people about great ideas. And one of the things I do, because I do live in Los Angeles and I'm stuck in traffic all the time, is most of my day is spent in the car doing basically traffic in the car. So one of the things that have saved my sanity from LA traffic is listening to podcasts. So I started listening to a lot of podcasts, like the one you're doing now, and listening to people. And one of the ones that inspired me the most was a podcast called The Nerdist, which is very, very popular. And what I loved about it was not necessarily, I mean, I love the content is great, but what really got me interested is sort of listening to how they do it and how simple it is, because they made it very much like chit-chatting with people and not really editing them at all. And I said, well, hell, if I just chatting with people and record a conversation and just put that on the internet, I could do a podcast too. And I'm already having conversations with great people all the time, so why don't I just try recording them? And so I talked to Lon, and I said, hey, Lon, I want to do a podcast. And he says, all right, well, what does it take to do a podcast? And how much time is it going to take? It's like, well, I want to take the least amount of my time and have the greatest content I can get based by just on the people I'm talking to. So ended up getting a few microphones and a mixing board and started putting things together and started trying to record a few here and there. And we started recording it, and it's called the CG Garage, and it started doing pretty good, and then it got more and more attention. And then I figured, oh, well, my podcast gear is fairly portable, so when I go to events, I just take it with me and I record more podcasts over there. And so I started learning about podcasting, and realized like, oh, as long as I put out a good podcast once a week and do this, then maybe I'll get an audience. And I very surprisingly, for such a niche group of nerdy people, like you say, who just talk about CG, I end up getting a big audience. So it was really a lot of fun, the podcast. And so I'm over 100 episodes now. I just put out the 110th episode with Vlado. So it's been fun. That's basically my job, is looking at cool things in computer graphics and seeing how we're going to change things. So that's basically, it's hard to describe my job, because it's not like I'm working on a movie. It's more like I'm doing stuff with fun people.
That's quite a lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a very stupid question, sorry, but just explain what you mean by computer graphics, because I know people who, when we say computer graphics, they probably think of just like graphic design, and also what visual effects is, just to get clear with other people.
Okay, no problem. Well, computer graphics is there's a lot of ways that you can generate imagery on a computer. So one of them is graphic design, as you said, where you'd put some pretty text or some flying logos or things of that nature, and that's generally they call that computer graphics, or in some ways. But CGI, which is computer generated images, which is what I do mostly, is really based on much photorealism. So the images that I create on the computer are supposed to be as as close to reality as possible. And in some cases, in most cases, if you do a good job, you don't even know that it's real or not real. So that's really sort of the area that I'm in, and I do it's generated. Most of the work I do is built in virtual three-dimensional space. So it looks like a set that's out there, and then you sort of do the whole set, build it on a computer, and then you use very similar tools, although they're all virtual, as you would use in the real world. So you'd put lights up, how the world it looks, and you have a camera and you put the focal length of the camera. So if it's a 35 millimeter or whatever, all of this is simulated on a computer to look right. And then you use a rendering engine like the one that my company does, called V-Ray, which for your audience and for a bit of pride for our company, V-Ray actually this year recently won a technical Oscar for. It's actually not an Oscar; it's a Academy Award for the technology we developed for the filmmaking. So over 150 films have been done using our software to make it to do that. So it'll just give people an idea of what that is. So visual effects is really, as some of your audience may have seen. Movies or behind the scenes of movies where you see an actor and behind it's a bunch of blue screen. Well, visual effects is what fills in the rest. That's blue screen. So we do all that on the computer. It used to be done a lot with miniatures, and sometimes still is, but rarely these days. And then all of that is put together and assembled, where you take the whatever is live action, put that together, and that's usually done in a process that's called compositing, which would make sense as a word, as you composite the two images together. And so that's basically what visual effects is. Does that help explain things, Greg?
Yeah, perfectly. It actually does.
Okay.
I think that's a very good explanation. And actually,
Good.
most of what I do, I'm a compositor, so I do a lot of compositing.
There you go. Now your audience knows what you do.
Exactly. So let's take me a little bit back. What were you what were you aiming for throughout your career? Like, I know I used to be at a point where all I wanted is to work in visual effects in movies or in commercials. It was pretty much objective what I wanted to do. Just like, look, I just want to sit on a computer and work on a cool movie blowing stuff up or whatever that is. I don't know what that was to you back then, even before you started with architecture. What were you trying to achieve in your career as the?
That's an interesting question, because I've been thinking about it a little bit. I had, I guess, when I was very young, we in a family. I lived in. I was actually born in Cairo, in Egypt. My father's American and my mother's Hungarian, and my dad worked at the American University in Cairo. He's the business manager there, so he was kind of managing all the business and affairs and fundraising and all of that stuff. And so AUC, which was the university, was building some new building on campus, and a lot of universities obviously they like their buildings to be very well known or renowned or whatever, and so they hired a fairly established architect, a guy named Hugh Jacobson, to build this new building. And my dad became good friends with him because obviously they had to fund the building. And so he became a friend of the family, and he'd stop by our house. And I saw this guy and I was like, he's so cool. And I became really enamored by this architect. And I was about 6 at the time, and sort of just loved the idea and sort of him sort of explaining what an architect does. And he was a successful architect, which helps it sound more exciting, because there's a lot of architects that are very disgruntled, unfortunately. But he was a successful architect, and I was so enamored by him. And he came by a lot. And so I think by the age of around 7, when people were saying, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be an architect. So everyone, because that was not like I want to be a fireman or I want to be an astronaut, right? Being an architect, my family is like, yeah, all right, well, great. So study, a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and those are going to be the good combination for you for architecture. And so, that's what I did. I wanted to be an architect, wanted to be an architect, wanted to be an architect. And when I went to undergraduate school, in fact, I'd continued to stay in touch with Hugh for a while, and I was asking him, education advice, and he'd advised me not to go straight to architecture school. He said, "Why don't you broaden your education as much as possible? You can get your architecture degree as a master's degree if you're willing to give it the time." So I went to I did my undergraduate in math and art for that reason. But knowing that I was going to go to architecture school, and then I applied to Rice and I got in and was excited and I got to be an architect. And it was strange how once you do the thing that you thought you wanted to do, that it doesn't always seem like it is what you thought it was going to be.
That's true, really. Yeah, that's really, really true.
Yeah, and that, which is fine. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not. And so I wasn't necessarily shy to move away from that. I was kind of looking at things and saying, "Oh, well, I could take this knowledge and move into the movie industry." The movie industry is obviously very, very, very sexy and appealing, right?
It is glamorous,
yeah, it's very glamorous. And you think that you're going to be meeting movie stars and stuff, which I knew you wouldn't, because I'd actually known enough people in the visual effects industry, knowing that that it was fine. Like it's not it's not necessarily very glamorous. And what's funny is, like, I had and there's a lot of ex-architects in visual effects, and a lot of people's like, "Oh, the hours in visual effects, they're crazy. You do all this stuff." Yeah, he knows that. He works in architecture. It's the same deal. Like, his architecture works crazy hours too. So I was already used to the fact that I was going to have to dedicate a lot of time and a lot of energy in visual effects, and it was very different. But the big difference that happened when I moved from architecture to visual effects was architecture is a very, very well established profession. I mean, it's the oldest creative profession, right? So there is a process of change in architecture is slow, even though it requires knowledge of innovation. It's still fairly slow. And visual effects, man, especially at the time when I got into it in 2002 or so, it was very young. I came in as a new person in the job, and I was already one of the older people, at the age of
really?
at the age of 31 when I started in visual effects, I was already one of the older guys there. Everyone was so young, and it's also, it's not so much at the time now, but back then it was a area that was, especially digital domain. It was like working in a frat house. I mean, people were just hanging out and partying and drinking and staying up late people worked hard and played hard all the time. So it was very much, and that honestly, just those two things combined can be very draining on your personality as well. But yeah, I think that was one of the big things to the transition into that area was kind of interesting to me, for sure.
Right. So one of the things that I noticed about you as well is that you have kept most of the people that you have had throughout your career, that they ended up you ended up meeting them later in your life, that you ended up on new ventures, like at a new company, or like I know you've met Vlado before, right? Even before you started working with Chaos Group, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know. I met Vlado when he first made V-Ray, because I loved the product, and this was back when I was still working in architecture. So that I met him very, very early, like 2003 or 4. No, wait, 2002. Yeah, it was at a SIGGRAPH. SIGGRAPH is a big conference for the computer effects and computer stuff. Computer graphics, thank you. Computer graphics. It stands for SIGGRAPH, stands for Special Interest Group Graphics, for those who want to know that. But anyway, so I went to SIGGRAPH. It was a big conference, and it was in San Antonio, and that's when I first met Peter and Vlado. So yeah, I've known him for forever. And yeah, and I keep in touch with everyone. That's a big thing for me, for sure.
And I saw on the podcast as well, it's like you have had so many people that you have worked with over the years, and you have a story with most of them, and some of them are guys that actually helped you at Sony and places like that. So it's pretty fascinating that you have managed. I don't know if that was intentional or that's something that just happened dynamically.
I don't, I think well, first of all, the visual effects industry is actually much smaller than people think it is. So I can walk into any studio here or Vancouver, whatever, and I'm pretty sure I'll know at least 2 or 3 people, at least. Because the people move around a lot from company to company. There's not as much loyalty to the company as people think they are. So if you're at a company for more than 5 years, it's pretty amazing. But so I tend to, since people move around a lot, I tend to know a lot of people that have passed through wherever I've been, or so we end up knowing each other that way. So that makes it a very small industry, which is kind of nice. But yeah, but sometimes it's just luck. Sometimes it just happened to me the other day. Just last week, I was at a meeting, and I can't necessarily say where the meeting was, but we were waiting in a reception area, and I was with Vlado. Vlado was in town because of him getting his Academy Award, and we were going to meet at this company, and all of a sudden this guy shows up, and I look at him, I was like, oh my God, and I said, Michael Bell, and he looks at me and says, you look familiar too. I said, yeah, you were my professor at Rice University, my first year of architecture school. He goes, oh my God, it's been 20 years. I said, yeah, it has been probably 23. So yeah, it's you just run into people. So it's great. And I've been back in touch with Michael and finding out all the cool things that he's doing, which is kind of awesome.
Right. And right now, at this moment, with all the changes in technology, there's still a lot of people that feel that when they look at the career path, they see it as something that has to be definite, as if, if you can study architecture, you just have to be an architect. And they really find it hard to break out of that and do other things. Like, what are the patterns that you see and you can think of as to apply some of your knowledge from one industry and transforming to the other industries, and so that you can lead to a different career as you have done over the years?
Well, you see, I left architecture, but I completely value everything that architecture brought me. And I think that architecture as an education was extremely valuable overall, beyond teaching you how to be an architect and how to do buildings. So I think one of the things that I learned in architecture that became applicable to everything I do is, and if there's anyone in your audience that is an architect, they'll know this, is one is learning how to go through process and iteration of design. And that's something that you learn in architecture very quickly. You also learn things to never take your work to be very precious, which also helps. So that if someone says, I don't like what you're doing, you can say, no problem, here's 5 other ideas, right? So that's what architects do, and they do a really good job of that. The other thing that architects do really well, and I think this is a skill that I learned being an architect as well, is being able to communicate your ideas, especially those that are related to something visual. So you can communicate how an architecture space is done, or say, this is how we should do this, or this is how it will be done. And you can take that skill set and apply it to visual effects. You can say, all right, here's how we're going to build a set, and here's how we're going to do this, and here's how we're going to do that. And that's what an architect does. And that works great in other fields. So I think that's the thing, is like, your education I see education as teaching you how to learn things as opposed to learning a specific thing. So I learned how to learn while I was in school, which was a very valuable lesson, because I'm still learning new things every day. So I'm still using that skill of learning, right?
Right. Because I assume even when you go on a new job in a new industry, there's still so many things to learn, actually, even though
Absolutely.
you're bringing some knowledge from the other side, but you still have to learn something new about what you're about to do.
Absolutely. I learn constantly new things, and that's a great thing. I love the idea of saying, oh, okay, well, and that's the nature of visual effects, especially in the early days. Is everything you did was something that no one's ever seen before, so you have to learn how to do that. Including you've never seen how to do something like this. It's like I want to see, this this building crumble like a giant tornado ripped it apart. It's like, well, I've never seen that, so I got to figure out how that's going to look. So that you learn how to do that. So it's constantly a learning process. And especially when I started, there wasn't really any visual effects schools like there are now. Now there's a lot of visual effects schools. But back when I started, there was none. So everyone who worked in visual effects came from some other industry. I remember my supervisor at on Day After Tomorrow. His background, he had a PhD in aeronautics and from MIT, and he worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab, NASA here in Los Angeles before he moved into the film industry. So you can tap into that knowledge, which is great. You can say, oh, how would this work? And you would say, well, this is how a plane would work, and this is how it gets lift, and this is when this happens. So you can tap into everyone's knowledge. That was one of the wonderful things about visual effects is the variety of different knowledge that people had. There's a guy I worked with at Method who was, I guess he had studied genes and how genes work and DNA and all that stuff. So big medical person, always a good thing to have sometimes.
So what would those things be today that you can actually see? Because do you think, actually, let me rephrase the question. Do you think the visual effects industry is stagnated at the moment? Like there isn't so much new things to do?
No, I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's a lot of the problems that came up have been solved in a lot of ways. And to the point where back in the early days, there was no way to solve some of these problems. So all the companies created their own software to solve the problems, which it was basically all of them had proprietary software.
Absolutely.
But nowadays, almost all the software that's being used is off-the-shelf software. And the off-the-shelf software is very, very, very good, to the point where if you're developing your own software, it's just a lot of money that you're developing towards software that may not necessarily even be good enough anymore. So off-the-shelf software is great and works really well. So a lot of visual effects kind of fall in line, and they all kind of they look good, and all the visual effects look great, but they're not necessarily going to be massively innovative unless there's a massively innovative vision behind it. A good example would be the Doctor Strange stuff. I mean, that was very unusual, right, and very cool. So that comes from great ideas, and really wonderful to see that kind of stuff. But I think that right now it is a little bit stale in some cases. I do think that there's some really interesting things happening from the minds of visual effects people that are going to start to go beyond movies, especially in the world of virtual reality and other areas of computer graphics. I think that people are going to take what they've learned from the movie industry and apply some of that technology that is, I believe in the next, well, conservatively speaking, 10 years, but more aggressively 5 years, you're going to see a lot more of what was used in movie industry and the big visual effects stuff on data. So in the virtual reality world or anything else, I think that a lot of people are going to start using computer graphics in ways that that is going to be really special. The example I like to give, just using my software as an example, right? I mentioned that the V-Ray, which is a rendering engine, can be seen as a virtual camera of some ways, right? So if I'm using your photography as an example, right now we have a very, very good camera. We have does amazing photography. So I will use that and put it in the metaphor of photography. I say it's the Leica, right? A Leica is a fantastic camera. For people who don't know it, it's a handmade German range-finding camera. It is actually not necessarily the simplest to use, but if you put it in the hands of a really good photographer, it can take some amazing photographs. But it also costs, $8,000 for the camera or something like that, and each lens costs another couple $1,000. So it's not for the mass consumer. But the way that our software is working, and I think that the way that almost all the software is going to be coming, is it's slowly going to turn into an iPhone camera, where anyone can use it.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to be able to do amazing stuff because we're going to simplify it to the point where people can think of it as an extension of reality. And I think that therefore in the future, all of the computer graphics that are being done in this industry is going to start to become much more interesting, which is going to expand creativity to a whole new kind of place. And I think VR is an example of where that could be.
Right. So do you think VR is not going to be just like 3D TV kind of thing where it came blah 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 as a fad and then it went because it failed? No, this time
no, I think
it's staying around.
I don't. Well, okay. So the problem with 3D TV is that that's the one trick it does, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything else. Like it doesn't serve any other purpose. It serves a purpose of being something that looks 3D, and then almost everyone who watches a 3D movie or gets a 3D TV, after about 5 minutes of seeing it in 3D, they forget that it's 3D. And they could have watched a 2D version and it looks just the same. So that is the only thing it's offering, is making the image look deeper, right? VR can do so many things. And this is where it's going to either work or not work. It can serve to try to create a movie in VR, which a lot of people are trying, when I think, honestly, that's not necessarily the right approach. But it can also be used to create a virtual space for people to meet in. It can take you and let you travel and experience other places that you may not necessarily be able to go to. It can be used in architecture. That's another big thing. Obviously, I'm very familiar with that, where that's the whole nature of architecture, is to be able to look at things that haven't been built yet. So we can create them in virtual reality and say, this is what your building will look like. It's like, or even more extreme example than that is, why even build anything at all? And if you have it in VR, then that's it. So the VR space is a new real estate and architecture space where architects can just build new spaces, and that would be a new location that you can think of in the virtual world. So I think that VR has a lot more to offer than the novelty of what it is, for sure.
Right. So what are the things you would say people should pay attention to in terms of saying they can carry their experience or expertise and transform them into new ventures besides VR, for example?
I think it's really about being open-minded. And the best way to be open-minded is to constantly look beyond what you do. Well, I think if you just look at, for example, VR as an example, and I don't want to, it could be anything, but if you look at anything that VR is, this is an industry that is brand new. So whatever you contribute to this industry is completely valid, because if you are contributing to it, you are part of the pioneers. So it's up to you to tell people how to use these things. So it's really an opportunity for people to say, hey, this would be cool. Why don't we do this? And not really worry about whether it's something that they should or shouldn't do, because you're the person who would actually ultimately be telling people what they should and shouldn't do. So that's kind of the nice thing about doing what I do now, because most of what I do is new technology, right? So I'm doing things in virtual reality. I'm doing things in another area called virtual production, which is a little bit more involved. But if this is new stuff, then I can tell people what to do, and sort of like my ideas are just as valid because this is a completely new technology. So take what you know and see how what you do could do something interesting in a field that's brand new. So I'd say don't worry about whether that works or doesn't work. Just make it your own.
Absolutely. And I have a question, actually, very visual effects related.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, well, I think that movies that are made with a lot of matte painting and compositing look much better than those which are 100% 3D or like say 90% 3D. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. Because I'm saying this on the basis of I came up to this conclusion after I watched X-Men Apocalypse.
Okay.
I think it wasn't, I didn't enjoy the movie first of all anyway, but then I also felt like the visual effects were too much. It just didn't feel right to me for some reason. But then you look at a movie like Mad Max, it was great, I think. It was still 3D and visual effects, but it felt right for some reason. I don't know.
Well, this is something that's very important to me. And I don't think CG or computer CGI is bad.
Absolutely.
I think bad CGI is bad. And when CGI is very good, you don't even know it's there. Yeah. And that's your job. I mean, it's really sad because when you've done a really, really good job, no one knows you've done anything. Yeah. That I think is the problem, is that there is so much CG out there right now that most of it goes unnoticed, especially the good CG. So that's, I think, a problem. And there's a lot of really great CG that people don't even realize are there. So I don't necessarily think it's to blame on the computer graphics or the technology itself. I think it's really honestly to blame on a lot of things that because I can, for example, all right, let's use your example. Did you see Deadpool?
Yes, I liked Deadpool.
Okay. Yeah, so the entire like freeway chase scene, most of that was 100% CG.
Yes. I'm
right?
aware, yeah.
So, and that's not matte painting or anything. That's all computer generated. And I would bet you that 99% or more percent of the people don't even realize that.
Yes.
Because it's really good CG. So that is, I think, the downfall of CG is that there's so much of it that you can't always get the best CG out there. And so sometimes it's not that great. And people say, oh, it looks bad because it's CG. No, it doesn't look bad because it's CG. It's just not necessarily good CG. Just like the movie's not good because the acting's bad. You can't just say, well, the acting is bad because it's CG, which, by the way, people say that, and that really upsets me.
I know, yeah. Respect
if
VFX.
It's bad acting, it's bad acting. Don't blame the CG on bad acting, you know. So yeah, or the script is bad, you know. Like that's the biggest problem. I went on a big rant, and you probably heard it on my podcast about Jurassic Park and how I think that basically Jurassic World was a terrible movie, not because of the CG. In fact, the CG was the only thing that saved it. It was fantastic CG. It was just a bad script. I hated the story. So, and then people blame it. It's like, oh, it was better in Jurassic Park because they used practical effects. It's like, that's not true. It was a better script.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have had very interesting people on your podcast. For example, Tim Miller, the director of Deadpool we're talking about.
Yeah.
What have you learned from, say, Tim Miller over the years, or just by having him around on your podcast?
Well, I mean, I have had some amazing guests, and I'm really very, very fortunate about it. Tim is a very approachable person, amazingly approachable. But he was, you know, honestly, and he's the first person to say that. And you can, if you listen to one of the first, I did an episode with Tim just himself before Deadpool came out.
Yes.
And it was a really great episode. And the thing I liked the most about it is Tim was very honest about how he has evolved as a person and how he didn't always used to be kind of as approachable as he is now. He was a lot more macho and rough and tough, and he still is to some extent, but he acknowledges it about himself now. He's kind of says, I hurt some people's feelings. I did this and that, and he says it, and I'm really just sort of honored to hear him talk about it. It's like, wow, he really came into himself and acknowledged and grew as a person over the years, which is wonderful, because I think that if it wasn't for that growth that he had done, he would never have been as successful as he was doing Deadpool. And I think a lot of that is part of that. And even on the 100th episode, he was very honest about why he walked away from Deadpool 2, which I think was also a very, very brave thing for him to do. And I think it's gonna be better for him overall. So I'm very, very proud of Tim. Nice guy, and he's very close to Blur Studio, and I know a lot of people at Blur. They're kind of hang out there often. They're just down the street here, and he's very approachable. He says hi to me when I see him, so I'm very, 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 very glad to have him as a friend and a guest on the podcast. So
great. To all the listeners, I'll put the link in the description, then they can check out your podcast with all the guests. But then, to you, what are the things that you can look back upon and say you have changed, or you have actually learned from them and kind of grew in some sort of way?
What have I learned and grown? I've learned to listen. I've learned to be more active, a better active listener. It was sort of bringing up the idea of like, what do you take the knowledge that you have and something new? That was another one of your questions. And what I do is, whenever someone is telling me something, I'm constantly using what they're telling me to think of what we could do that would be cool. Like, hey, wow, that's a great idea. What if we did this? Because I think that's something that I've learned through listening, as opposed to just trying to stay in my own head. I have a lot of ideas, but all of those ideas never originated from me. They almost always originated from a conversation I've had with someone, because I think that's how great ideas happen. They happen through conversation. So I think that's the thing that I've learned, is listening to people, having great ideas, and working with people too. And it's amazing how much better ideas get when two people talk about them, as opposed to just sticking in your head, or two or more people. So that's one of the things I learned the most, I think.
Great. So sticking on this same subject, then what are the things that you have had a successful career, obviously, but then what are the things that you would have liked to change or do differently in the past, like maybe in your 20s or in your high school years, or that you would have paid more attention to?
Pay more attention to. Oh boy. It's almost like, okay, so, but honestly, would I be here now if it wasn't for the mistakes I made in the past? So
probably not.
Right. So I'm almost like, if I want to go back and do something differently, I'm almost worried, would it screw me up later? So I'm almost like, yeah, I know it hurts now, but trust me, it's going to work out great. And that's how I see myself now, but what would I change if I've always had this thing, like, I wish I had paid attention to certain classes a little bit more, or certain things that I've forgotten over the years. I was like, I wish I'd continued to remember some of those things, because I think they'd be useful. But I don't know. I think that was one of them, is that, and I think if I had been a better listener, I could have, back then, I think I could have been better overall, or maybe have gotten to where I am now faster, because I'm constantly reinventing myself and constantly reinventing careers for myself, and here I am at the age of 45 and I'm still doing that. So I don't know if I'd ever change, but I don't know. I guess that's the thing. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I'd change anything, honestly. And it's not that I say that I had a perfect life. It's far from it, but I would hate to. I'd hate to change anything because I'm having a good time now.
Right. That's a good answer, actually. Very fair one. Then what would you say? How do you create freedom at work? Because you seem like you're one of the guys that I know have so much fun on what they're doing. Like I know you have made a film, V-Ray, in real life, and you're involved with the Digital Human League. You kind of always have some side projects, including the podcast. It's actually based on your job, what you do, and then you just added kind of like an add-on on the job that you're already doing. How do you decide? Right. How do you come up with those ideas, and what do you have in it that makes your employers or the people you work with to find it more plausible to actually go ahead and do it?
Well, first of all, I try to make sure that I have a job that makes that something of value to the company, right? So, and honestly, between Lon and I, like I said when I first started the job, is we created the job even after I was hired, right? I was actually hired as a creative director for the company, and they realized like, well, using Chris to look at company logos and T-shirts and approving things like that is not necessarily going to be the best use of his time. So started creating all these other creative projects. And so you can define, to answer your question for people who are wondering what do they do, I say you can define your own job. It's not, I feel sorry for people who says like, well, it's just a job and it sucks, but at the end I get to go home. And that's fine. Some people need that and that's great. But I'm not satisfied with that. I'll tell you what, there was so went to architecture school, as you know, and studying great architecture, and you always have dreams of being a great architect, as you would with any job, right? You're like, I want to be, the best architect or whatever, right? And so I was at an internship at an architecture company, a very good one in New York, named Fox and Fowl, and I loved them. It was great, and I was just doing a summer internship there, and I was working and I was having a discussion and I was working on some drawings and they actually put me on the design team, which is amazing as an intern. And I was kind of a little bit frustrated and I was communicating that to one of the guys who was sitting nearby me. And he was just doing drawings, construction drawings for a building. And he said, Chris, you're so young. And boy, I tell you, whenever we all came out of architecture schools, we all had dreams of being great architects, but it's not always going to happen, buddy. It's not going to do that. And I looked at him and I was like, I didn't say anything, but I don't know if I can use bad words on your thing, but
yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
absolutely.
No. So I was like, oh, fuck you, man. This is not right. No, I am going to make something out of myself. And I'm not going to say, well, that's it. I'm just going to be doing architecture and it's going to be a shitty job for the rest of my life. I can't accept that. So I never did. And even if it wasn't going to be in architecture, it was always going to be something else. I always wanted to do fun stuff, like, surround myself by having fun. And if my job isn't fun, then what's the point? And then the big thing, and this is something, I'll tell you what, this is another thing I learned, is balancing that with your overall life. And there is something to be said about that. And it's an important thing. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to sacrifice one part or another part of life. Is you can make your life more fun overall if you're able to balance it out. And so, as an example, like you said, I always have some crazy idea of something I want to do, and I wanted to do another short because when you start shooting shorts, you get an itch to do them all the time. And I had this idea to do another short, and my daughter, who's young, she's 10, she decided that she really wanted to know about the process of making movies, like what does it take to make movies or stuff like that. And so I decided to have her direct it. I said, all right, wow, you are going to direct this short and you are going to be the director. We're going to write it together and you're going to learn how to do it. And so I talked to my friends. Like you said, I've done other shorts. And Dan Tron, who directed the VIRL thing, he was a great director and a great writer. And my friend Daniel Buck, who is also a very good friend of mine, amazing behind the camera. So I said, all right, I'm going to hire Daniel Thrawn, and he's going to be your assistant director, which means he knows everything about how to take it done, and he's going to show you the process, and you're going to how to shoot things and everything else. So she directed it, and then Dan Thron helped her, and Daniel Buck was behind camera, and he would show her, and she was the boss. So she learned everything about it. So I got to shoot a short, but I also got to spend time with my daughter, and we had a really bonding experience. And so that's how you blend it together, right? So I think that's what the key is. It's like you can balance out, right?
Wow. And that's like a very great experience for a 10-year-old girl, that's like making you feel my 10. I think that just going to expand the way she thinks and she look at other things. I can tell with that.
Yeah, and I didn't force it down her throat. She's the one who wanted to do it. And I was like, I can put you in front of some great talent, and you're going to pull off a great short,
Right. When is the short coming out?
Oh, it was something I did. It will probably be out. The idea was I go to this conference every year called Trojan Horse Was a Unicorn.
Yes.
It's in Portugal. And it's a crazy name, but it's a fantastic, very creative group. And I wanted to propose something to them. And so I was going to write them an email. And then I ended up saying, have any idea because I have to do something different. Like you mentioned, I was trying to do something crazy. So I decided to do a short instead of actually emailing them and doing an idea of showing them, proposing something in a video form. So I decided I was going to do that, and it was going to be some small thing, a day of shooting possibly, and just some editing and put it together. And then I said, oh, well, why don't I do this with Lily, and we can do something fun over the weekend together. So that's how it ended up coming out, and it should be out. It's in front of the guys from THU that had out there. So I think Andre told me that he's possibly going to put it on the internet. So when it's out, it'll come out. I don't know when this podcast comes out, but it may be out soon.
Right. I don't want to take too much of your time now, but before we close, I just want to ask you a question about creativity. I was actually having a conversation with my friend the other day about, when we say on a job somebody is a creative, it's kind of like saying that the other people are not creative. But in an actual fact, like everyone is creative. But so my friend came up with a conclusion of saying, look, when you say creative, usually they're just people that can be themselves, really. It's just what makes the creative type, or maybe the other ones who could say they're not creative, even though they are, but maybe they just can't come out with their creative ideas or their other ways of expression. I don't know what you think about that.
Interesting. I think the way that you describe the term creative, I would say that that's the person whose actual ideas you're trying to execute in some ways, right? Because like you said, everyone is creative. But if a director or someone or in the advertising agency or whoever, there's like, here's my idea. So that's if you're going to get more literal, you can say that's the creation of the idea. So that's the creative person. But then the people who execute that idea are also creating it, obviously. So it is a harder definition. Yeah, I don't know what the definition of a creative is. That's a hard one to describe.
Right. So right before we close, then, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, cool. Explain Everything Has for Now. We're gonna close.
Really?
With that one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is a woof. Okay. There is a physical principle, and yes, this is very nerdy, of how light reacts on surfaces, depending on which the angle of light, the angle at which that light reflects off things. So, as an example, imagine a very like an 8-ball in pool, right? Or so it's shiny and it's black, but the front surface of that is actually going to reflect less light. It's going to be a duller version of the reflection, or a muted version of reflection, compared to the grazing angle. The grazing angle is a much higher reflectivity, and that is attributed to something called the Fresnel angle, which is how much light gets absorbed by a surface versus how much gets reflected by a surface. And there's a number called the index of refraction that determines the shininess or the of that value. And it has long. Remember, I was talking about it in the how architecture got it in terms of lighting better than the visual effects world. The visual effects world long ignored that concept of Fresnel, and it would basically make everything. If you remember the early days of computer graphics, everything kind of looked like a chrome ball reflection. It was all kind of an even reflection on everything, which is not correct physics. And it used to get me very, very frustrated, because no one followed the laws of physics correctly, while the math is actually fairly straightforward to put in there to make it look correct. And I would actually get very angry about it. And I would yell at people about it. It's like, well, did you put a Fresnel in? I was like, no, I just toned out. It's like, no. And I would get angry about it, and I would yell at people about how everything had Fresnel. Everything. And so that's why we turned this in the joke. And you can put that IRL piece in there if you want to into your show notes. I did this joke about someone where I basically pistol whipped them into believing me that everything in the physical world has Fresnel. So that took off as a little bit of a thing, and that a lot of people quote me on that now. And in fact, Paul Debevec, those of you who know computer graphics know that Paul Debevec is kind of a very, very important in the terms of the math and science behind computer graphics. And he was giving a big lecture at SIGGRAPH in front of several thousand people, and he apparently said to everyone, I wasn't at that talk, unfortunately, but someone told me, it's like, well, Paul went up there and he was giving his lecture and was talking about Fresnel, and he says, and everyone knows based on Chris Nichols that everything has Fresnel. So yeah, that's what it is. So I would like to say that when things stopped looking as shiny and CG as they did, 10, 15 years ago, that my frustration and anger may have had something to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that's a very good case. But then after the movie, I haven't seen on your CV that you put up actor Chris Nichols as an actor. Why? Why is that?
Yeah, I did not expect. Did I tell the story? I'll tell the quick story about what that short is. The whole idea behind the short is that we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of our software, and we wanted to do a video to thank the owners, Vlado and Peter, for the being around for 10 years, et cetera. And the way it was originally proposed was, as some users doing, in a conference room saying, I've used V-Ray for 10 years and it's the greatest thing, and blah, blah, blah. And I hate those videos. They're just very, very boring. Yeah. So we came up with an idea where we were going to basically make a parody of that. And turn it into some crazy scenario, and hilarity ensued from there. But we wrote the script, and I did the whole thing, and we produced it, and I was working on location scouting and everything else, and Dan Thon was going to direct it. And it wasn't until the very first day of shooting that I realized that I was actually going to be the actor. I was like, oh, God, you mean I actually have to say these words in camera and be believable? So I had no knowledge that, or no preparation mentally for that. So yeah, I didn't expect to be an actor for sure.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite lines in the movie was, of course, everything has Fresnel, and also at the end when you said, "I'm sorry, ladies, I'm a married man."
That's right. Oh, that was a funny story, because those actresses, they were models, right?
Yeah.
And it was another friend of mine. I asked him, can I shoot at your location? He had this incredible poolside area in his house, and I said, oh, this would be a great location for me to do like this final scene. And in the back of my mind, I was like, I got to find some actresses to play the beautiful women in this scenario. I was like, that's going to be tough. And I didn't know what to do. And he goes, oh, you know what? You want to shoot on this day? Well, Chris Blythe, he's going to be shooting a music video that day, so I don't know if that's going to work out. I was like, oh, really? He goes, yeah, he's doing some rap video with all these models and stuff. I said, hold on, what? So I called Chris and I said, I heard you're doing a rap video. Can I just sneak in there and do a few shots with someone and maybe steal a couple of your models for like 1 or 2 shots? So that's how that ended up happening. We were actually shooting a rap video at the same time as we were doing our thing.
Actually, to the people listening, Chris is doing all this on the job. That's it. He's working and he's doing this on the job.
Yeah.
That's so much fun. Then
absolutely.
That's all you need in a job. I think if all jobs were like that, people wouldn't be complaining or hating their daily job, whatever.
Oh, I complain, but I complain because it's not moving fast enough. I'm having too much fun.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Okay, thanks so much for your time, Chris. I don't want to waste your day here.
No, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Gray.
This was so much fun to me as well. Cheers, man.
All right, take care.
Cheers. And that was my conversation with Chris. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And thanks for listening. If there's anything else you think I should talk about, like a subject or somebody I should find and have a conversation with, I would appreciate it if you